Hi, everybody, and welcome back. And today we're going to focus in on the subject of what to eat. And we all know that that can be a tricky one come January time. Many of us try to completely change our eating habits. And what happens normally as we come into January and February, we find that they're just not sustainable and we go back to our old habits. So today we want to point out a couple of things that you can take away to help in terms of building sustainable habits that are helpful around nutrition. Now, one thing that we want to start with is by looking at the myths that actually accompany the industry that is nutrition. And I've listed some of them out here for you. So you can see there carbohydrates are bad, eating healthy is expensive and takes time, that you do not have, low fat is better, and frequent and smaller meals are superior. Now, what I want to bring in here is the idea that there's many more myths than what you just see here. But what we have to do in the nutrition industry and in the wellness industry as a whole is to try and find the truth behind the myth. Because the truth offers us context and balance, as we can see there. And if we just use the first one as an example, so carbohydrates are bad. That, in a way, is a misinterpreted and exaggerated version of the truth. Because yes, carbohydrates can be bad, just like any macronutrient can be bad in a diet where we overconsume calories. Why carbohydrates get the label of being bad is that carbohydrates are in many of the foods that we eat. But carbohydrates are also foods like fruits, vegetables, and high fiber grains. So they are foods that are vitally important for our brain and body. But we are led to believe by the myth that carbohydrates don't have a place in a healthy diet. And that the same can be said for the other ones that you see there. So I want you to explore the truth behind these myths. There are plenty of myths out there, and they tend to act like barriers when it comes to our nutrition. Now, if we look at the nutrition industry and we look at that word diet, that thing that we all tend to do from time to time, well, as you can see there, by its definition alone, diet indicates a short term fix. It indicates something that we do for a brief period, and ultimately we end up going back to old habits. So I want you to think of it more as building a nutrition strategy. Now, what does my nutrition strategy look like? You may be asking yourself. Well, we need to start here. And I don't need you to start by counting your calories. I just want you to understand some of the common things around nutrition. And what you see here would effectively be where many of us can fall down in terms of our nutrition. So you've got your protein, your carbs, your fat, and your water. Now, you may say to yourself, Mark, I don't really want to go counting my protein, carbs, fats, etc. And I don't want you to do that either. I don't want you to start getting into the mindset of having to count every calorie that you consume. But I want you to start being aware of, for example, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Have I got protein here? Have I got good quality carbohydrates? Have I got good quality fat in my diet? If you don't know what sources of those look like, I want you to go and search them out. I want you to go and search out good sources of protein, good sources of carbohydrate, and good sources of fat. Because ultimately, if you look across the space of your week and you've got 7 days, you may have 3 meals a day. Forget about snacks. This idea of having a snack, eating more frequently, it doesn't necessarily lead to better results. The better results comes from a routine that fits your lifestyle. So let's look at 3 meals a day. So that's 21 meals over the course of a week. If you can have 17 to 18 of those meals with the right amount of protein, carbs, and fat, you're going to fuel your body and mind. And as long as you then don't overconsume in those other 3 meals, you're going to be getting what you need from your nutrition strategy, from your nutrition plan. Now, I want to just touch on one or two bits before we finish up because many of you might be thinking, that all sounds great, Mark, but what do I do in terms of this addiction that I have to sugar? Well, what I'd say is everybody put up their hands. The question I'm going to ask you is, have you got a sweet tooth? Now, the reason I said everyone put up their hand is because most people will put up their hand. I would put up my hand. And it's for this reason here. When we eat sugar, it activates the reward center in our brain, so it releases dopamine. So many of us will have a sweet tooth. Now, this shows up in other places like alcohol, coffee, Netflix. These all produce dopamine in our brain. But the only issue is that some of these things are quite short lived. So the piece of chocolate might make us feel amazing for 5 minutes, but then we can crash back down. Or the breakfast that's high in sugar might give us a boost for an hour, and then we're feeling tired and sleepy again. So I want you to start to think about how much sugar are you consuming? How much quick hits of dopamine are you getting across a day? And the way to do that is to start looking at the foods that you're consuming. Like if I was to ask you the question, if you had a glass of orange juice, 200 mils, cornflakes with skimmed milk, an Actimel, and a flavored yogurt, how many grams, how many teaspoons of sugar do you think you might be having? Well, the truth is, this could be as many as 20 plus teaspoons in one sitting. And many people have a breakfast like that day in, day out, with very little protein and very little fat. And on the surface, it's a natural breakfast. So people actually think they're doing something beneficial to start their day. The truth is that if we have something like that, we're chasing that energy tail for the rest of the day. So I want you to start getting into the habit of being aware of some of the things that we see, some of the different names for sugar, the back of food labels, as you see here. Look out for the total amount of sugar in the food products that you have on a daily basis. Because this is the truth. There's a lot of food products that are actually loaded with sugar. So it's important for us to start to be aware of, for us in our diet, in our nutrition plan, in our strategy, where are we getting those high levels of sugar? Now, as we continue to move it on, the last couple of bits are things that will sound obvious, but are always important to go over. The overall calorie consumption, whether it's from good food or bad food, or helpful food or maybe unhelpful food. Now, you think of the ice cream you might have at the weekend, the couple of beers you might have at the weekend, the glass of wine. It's not about completely getting rid of those. But we have to be aware of the difference between 2 glasses of wine and 5 glasses of wine. What is the calorie difference? How many extra calories am I consuming? And the same has to be said for things like the healthier or more helpful foods like nuts and avocado and oils. These are foods that are full of nutrients, but are actually very high in calories. So be aware of your portion control. The difference between one handful of nuts and 3 handfuls of nuts is about 200 calories. So just be wary of how much you're consuming over the course of your day. I always like this one because I believe this is where we should all look to start. We need to try and increase our nutrient intake. Many of us don't have a diet that lacks calories, but we do have diets that lack nutrients. Start with extra veg, extra fruit, soups, homemade juices if you can. There's lots of ways we can get in those nutrients. Now, this is an obvious one, hydration. But what I would say to you is think of how easy it is to actually drink 2 liters of water. And what I'm going to say is if we become dehydrated by as much as 1%, it impacts our cognitive function by as much as 5%. So that's a simple step that we can do to not only help us in terms of hunger levels and energy, but also help us stay focused as we move through our day in this new way of working as we're staring at screens for long periods as we move throughout our day. And then the final takeaway tip for me, guys, is again, this is always the final takeaway tip. You'll start to see that you've got to be kind to yourself in this process. You've got to make sure that if you have a bad day, you don't judge yourself, you don't feel guilty, you just press that reset button. Because we don't want to end up like our individual here, where we're caught between our idea of success and our day-to-day practice. And what makes that gap wider is that negative internal conversation. So set realistic goals, but be flexible with those goals and be kind to yourself in your pursuit of those goals. Here's a couple of different questions that you might consider as you start to make changes in terms of your nutrition. And as always, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, everybody.